Not all information is the same, and that's why Evidentia is very flexible in how it allows you to collect and manage your information. Today on Evidentia Answers, we're going to look at how I chose to handle transfer deeds, and stay with us. Hello friends, my name is Ed Thompson and I'm the creator of Evidentia software. I have this odd, not hobby, but thing that I like to collect information about the houses that I've lived in. I don't know why, it's just one of those things. And a few weeks ago, I was trying to figure out, well, when did we move into that house? And the first house we moved into when I was just a baby, when did we move there? And I know we moved out of that house when I was in first grade, but I don't remember if it was the beginning of first grade, the middle of first grade, or the end of first grade. So I decided to dip into some deed records, and that presented me with not necessarily a challenge, but a different way of entering that data into Evidentia. So I thought I would share that with you today. Now, on my screen, I'm going to show you, this is the website I had gone to, and it actually has a ton of information. I found information about, well, some land transactions I didn't even know my dad had done. And all I had to do was kind of enter in some data here. If I enter in 1960 to 1962, and I choose deeds, and I'm interested in Thompson, and I'm going to put Raymond. Both my father and my grandfather are named Raymond, which is actually a good thing in terms of the information that I found. I'm going to go to Rehoboth, Massachusetts, and select search. And when I move down here, I can see four different transactions. The first one is when Raymond B. Thompson was the grantee. In other words, he was the one given the grant, given the deed, in March of 1961. And what I found out talking with my dad was that he was buying that house in anticipation of his mother moving down from New Hampshire. And then in June of 1961, he became the grantor and gave the, sold that house to my father, because my great uncles and my grandfather worked out something different for my grandfather, for my great grandmother. And so she was going to live with one of them back in New Hampshire. And now he had this house. My father and mother were a newly married couple. They had a child and were living in a very small apartment. So this was an opportunity for my father to buy some property. So let's go and look at these records in Evidentia. Now, of course, the first thing I wanted to do was to identify the sources. And there wasn't necessarily a category for deeds. So as an example, when I went to template and I typed in deed, there really wasn't anything there. And so then I was like, okay, so what kind of record is it? And I did vital, state and local records. Yes, this was local records. And when I scroll down, let me see which one I chose. I found a great hit. See, now this was a false lead. It wasn't a land warrant, or a land grant. This was a deed. And so if I go back to local records, and if I could spell it correctly, I moved down here. Let's see, vital records. It's not really a vital record. Vital. Okay, so I'm gonna local records. Vital records register. Well, this wasn't exactly a registration. let me see. I remember from the comment which one I chose. Well, so you see, I had a problem trying to identify the correct template to use. So I'm just going to pull up the record that I got. Now, I decided to title the source deeds so that all the deeds would sort at the same level. And these were deeds from Bristol County, and they were all from the same website. So all of the deeds, I've chosen to put all of the deeds that I found on this website in one database. And here I have the deed event or deed transaction when my grandfather bought the property, and then down below I have the transaction for when my father bought the property. And if I double click on this, you'll see here that this was image copies online. I just did a straight image copies online, and I want to go back to the template again and see if I can find that real quick, because let me go back to the other page. There we go, template. Because let me put new source on there. Because I already had a record kind of on the page, it kept going back to the same template. So now if I go, I had searched for online, right, and image records. So this one is, I was like, okay, I couldn't find a specific local record type, but these are image copies of some records online. And interestingly enough, when I clicked on it down in the template description, in the Evidentia Explained 3rd edition on page 494, it shows that this is an appropriate one for property and probate. And since I'm doing property, so I need to make that a little bit easier for me to find. All right, so back to the record. Now, I'm going to go back to deed because it's the only one, Bristol County. And when I entered the data, so the jurisdiction was Massachusetts, Bristol. The series was deeds. I don't know if that's exactly the right series to use, but I kind of put it there as a placeholder. The repository was the Northern Bristol Registry of Deeds. That's where the original record is. The image obviously is online. Repository location was in Taunton, Massachusetts. This is a database of images. The website creator or owner really didn't know what to put there. It wasn't critical. The website title, I put tauntondeeds.com, https tauntondeeds.com, so now I can get back to it. I accessed this record in 2021. Now everything up to here is data that's going to go into the source record. Some of it might also go into the citation, the specific citation. And you'll see why I'm going to this level of detail on this in just a moment. So now I'm going down. Unfortunately, even though up here I have jurisdiction, state, and county, and then down here I have jurisdiction, county, and state because that's how the citation wants it flipped. And I could have broken down that template into state and county, and probably should have, but that wasn't what I initially did, and I didn't want to redo all the templates when this version came out. But this is a specific volume. It's book 1378, page 294. The item of interest are my grandparents. The record date itself, and this is where I had to be careful, there was actually a stamp on the record that had 3rd of March 1961, and I accessed it a couple days ago on the 7th. Now, the reason I went into that level of detail is because there's a bug in the program. When I added a new record, a new citation, let me go ahead and do that, and I tried to create the listing, it still pulls up the exact same template, and you sort of need to know what data goes into the citation and what data goes into the source, or otherwise you're going to overwrite your source information. Now, in this case, it did a nice job of clearing out the fields that were non-source related, which is what it's supposed to do. But in the future, I'm going to lock these fields, but in general, don't touch the fields that are already there, because those are your source fields. And then you can go in and fill out the ones that have been blanked out because those are the citation specific ones. So that's what I did, and then I had this second record. So we'll go back to the first one. Now, I want to show you in just a second what I chose to attach, because this was a little bit different for me in terms of what I chose to attach. Now, of course, I want to attach the image, and give me a second. It went to the other screen. And what I chose to do for this actually, and this is a habit I'm starting to get into, is I have a program called Snagit. There's a lot of different screenshot programs out there. But in this, I chose to do a complete web page snapshot. So that's why I've got the stuff at the top and the whole web page. I felt that would give me a better place and time record of where and how I got that record. And if I zoom in, this is where we get a lot of information about what the transaction was like. And this was my grandparents, Raymond B. Thompson and Ellen Charles Thompson, buying the property as a foreclosure from a bank. Now, the other thing, so now I've got a nice image copy of the deed record that I'm recording. Now, the other thing I did, and there's a reason for it, is I transcribed the record. And so you'll see here that I've got a word-for-word transcription of most of what's on the record. It's reformatted for readability. In most cases, I didn't correct any spelling or anything like that because I want to see what's in the original record. I have a confession to make. I hate transcribing. I know the value, and I've done it for records where I really wanted to break down the information. So I cheated, and I'll show you how I cheated here in a minute. I went to a website. I went to a website called Free Online OCR. Now, there's nothing special about that website. It was the first free one I found, and I was kind of in a rush yesterday to pull all this information together. And all I needed to do was to select my file, which I'm going to do here for a second to show you how it came out. Because it wasn't magic. Okay, and if I go back to where my records are stored, back to the land records, and I'm going to just run this through again. And then I convert it. It's converting it into Word format. That's not what I wanted. Okay, well, it's still... now, what you're going to see here... Oops, come on, scroll. Okay. There's a little bit of garbage there's a lot of garbage in the record. It's reading some of the background sample data in there. It's got the login button, but it didn't see the whole thing. But then it's done a lot of stuff correctly. So what I did with this then is put it in my text editing program and compared it side by side with the actual image and corrected what I needed to correct, because for the most part it did get it right. But here you can see North Dighton Cooperative sank instead of bank, a corporation duly established, instead of under the laws of Massachusetts. So it took me a little bit to fix everything so that it did mirror exactly what was in the image, but it saved me a lot of time, and I need to spend some time, look at some OCR software and make it part of my genealogy toolbox. So that's how I got from that image to the actual text file that you see before you. Now, why did I go to that level of detail? Interesting fact, I had asked my father, I said, Dad, that first house that we lived in Rehoboth, do you remember the address? And my father, who's in his 80s, isn't very good at remembering a lot of stuff from back then unless I prime his memory. So he didn't remember the address, and that's why I wanted to look for it. One of the things I wanted to know was it still there? And it is still there, which shocked me. But the only way I could find out where it was is by going through these deeds. And then I used Google Maps to zero in on it and see what the house looked like. So the interesting thing was in 1961, when this property was purchased, it didn't have an address. Okay, if you look at the description, it's described as a certain tract of land situated on the east side of Anawan Street, which I knew it was on Anawan Street, beginning at the northeast corner of Mary J. Potts' land or house lot. Where did Mary J. Potts live? I don't know. Thence easterly bounded on the north by land formerly owned by Robert Blake, 224 feet to a corner of a wall for a corner. Now, I guarantee you that wall is not there. Thence westerly, still bounded by land now or formerly of George S. West, 295 feet to the canter of a rock in the line of Anawan Street for a corner. Thence bounded by said house lot, easterly 76 feet and northerly 140 feet to the first mentioned corner. And now this was helpful when I started to stack up the deeds, being the same premises conveyed to the North Dighton Cooperative Bank by deed of Arthur L. Potts, by mortgagee duly recorded in, and it records where that transfer had taken place. So no address at all. And so like this, there were two parcels here, and one of them had a house on it, and I guess the other one did not. And I didn't know for sure which one was which. And I'll show you how I dealt with that in Evidentia. So I'm going to go back to the first one and go to how I cataloged information. And what I did was I copied and pasted the entire section about that first property, or the first half of that deed, into Evidentia, into this source asserts that. Now, I want to be real clear here. Normally, I do not just copy and paste the information in the record into the claim. Because I'm usually not interested in every single bit of information that's in there. But in this case, I really knew that when I got to the point of doing any kind of proof analysis, I needed to know the four corners. And this was the only way I had. Now, if I had an address, my claim would be here that Raymond B. Thompson and Ellen C. Thompson purchased a certain tract of land, and I would put the address on there, and I'd be done with it. Maybe I'd put down being the same premises conveyed, blah, 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 because this allows me to, it's not precedence, isn't the word provenance. This allows me to track the provenance of that property. But I don't have an address, and I need to be able to match some things up. So that's what I chose to do. Now, this is where I also got a little bit different. Now, I did mark it as primary because in general, images of original records are considered original. And this is a government record, and it is, a government record is the primary source of information. But I want to look here. The way I tagged it, and remember to tag a claim, you double click on the record, and it made sense when it was short, but you see here the entire claim gets put at the top of the tag claim screen so you can reference it. But what I did was I tagged it as the property of Raymond Brooks Thompson, because that's what I was interested in about this, and the property of Ellen Charles Thompson. And then I did something interesting. And this is where it got a little bit different. I just made up a subject called the property of house on Anawan Street. And I did that just by typing it in here. Once I click the claim property, and I just house on Hawthorne. That's another one I know I'm going to use later. Hawthorne Drive. And I have to hit enter. And now House on Hawthorne Drive is a subject. If I go to the list manager and go to subjects and just enter in house, you see that I've got House on 801 Street and House on Hawthorne Drive as subjects because I wanted to research the provenance of that property. I was interested in who did we sell it to when we sold it, and how far back did that property go, and did the property records go on that website? And the answer, by the way, is 1957. And yes, the property is still owned, and it kind of revealed some interesting stories that I won't get into. But so I am treating the house as if it was a person, and that is why on this I refer to these as subjects and not as persons, because I've done this with military regiments as well. All right, so let's go back. So then the next thing I did was I went and did the same thing for when my father bought the property from my grandfather. And if I, this is where I went in, and yeah, I added the jurisdiction with the county and state mixed. It was the same book, but a different page. The persons of interest were my mother and father, not my grandparents. It was recorded on June 22nd, and I accessed it on the same date. So same source, different citation. And when I did the image, this particular image actually went, I hate that Windows does that automatically. Okay, come on. Where'd my image go? It has this tendency that if I hit the wrong corner, it goes to full page. And then when I drag it from one screen to another, if the resolution isn't the same. Now, one thing that was a little bit different here was that this deed transaction was 2 pages. And so what I did was actually scanned it as 2 pages. Now, I could have stitched them together in the program that I used to do the screenshot. More often, what I would have done is taken these 2 images and converted them into a single PDF. But it wasn't the most important part of this presentation, so I didn't do that. So I've got deeds 1961 0622-1 and 0622-2, which is the other page. And then I did the transcription. I did the OCR transcription again, as I did the last time. And that's when I discovered that actually when my grandfather transferred this property, he had both lots. So the house that my father bought included the tract of land with the improvements and a second parcel of land that didn't have the house on it. So I don't know if that, I'll have to put those 2 pieces together, but I don't know if it was the lot behind, which still hasn't been developed, or the one of the lots on either side, which have since been split. All right. And again, I did that so that when I got to cataloging information, you'll see here that I've got property of Raymond Thompson, just like last time, because he was the grantor, okay, of this transaction. And I wouldn't necessarily always capture the person I bought something from, but this is my grandfather, so it's part of his history. And then I've got down here the property of Raymond Edward Thompson, my father, who is the grantee, and he purchased the property. And so I can see kind of the, my father bought this from my grandfather. And and this is where I tied it to the same property of house on Anawan Street. And this is, so I'm going to look in a second about what the analysis pages would look like. Now, I only did those 2, but when I captured when my father sold it, I would add another citation to the same source, and I would tag the house with that. And when I go back to 1957 and forward to today with the various deed transactions, I would tag all of them with property of house on Anawan Street. Now let's analyze the evidence here real quick. Okay, so I'm going to choose first, see what comes up for my grandfather. Raymond Brooks Thompson, and property. And keep in mind, this isn't the only property that he's purchased over the course of his lifetime. But the point being that I can now analyze, I got a spelling error there. I can now analyze these two pieces of information about the purchase of the first part of the property, the purchase of the second part of the property, which it turns out I didn't need to split up because both of them were sold to my father. And then down here, I have the information about the sale of that of my grandfather's sale of that property to my father. And so anything I wanted to prove, or if I wanted to just, there's nothing really here to prove. So probably I would just, in my analysis, would just say something to the fact that my grandfather bought 2 tracts of land on Anawan Street from whoever he bought it from. And then if I change this to my father, basically I would do the same thing, and I can see I won't see 4 entries from my father. I'll see 2 entries from my father, because that's how I chose to split up the deed information. But this is where it gets really interesting, okay? If I choose house on Anawan Street, and I just treat it as a property, now I can begin. Now the evidence is kind of long, but what I can begin to do is, here I've got for that property, I can see that, and it's actually ordered the way I want it ordered. LNC, this was when they bought the property. This was, okay, let me look at it from the perspective of the property. This is when that property was sold to my grandparents on both counts. And this is when that property was sold to my father on both counts. And maybe if I depending on what I wanted to do, I could have actually split up the property, the property of house parcel 1, property of house parcel 2, and track those differently, because eventually they diverge and go a different way. Now, why was any of this important? Well, number one, I shared with you my interest in the provenance of the houses that I've lived with over the years. And the second thing is that I wanted to find out when the house got an address so that I could Google map it. And it turns out that, I'm going to go back here for a second. By leapfrogging using this paragraph of, this is the same property that was sold to them on March 3rd, and that it actually created a nice trail, even though there's no address here in the record. And in 1968 is the first time it shows up with an address. And I was able to Google it and find that address. Let's see. Actually show you what the house looks like. I know. It's more interest to me than it is to anyone else. But really, I should save this to the record as well. I haven't moved it in here. Did I? download it on this machine, or was it on my laptop? If I go to downloads, okay, I don't have it saved in a place that I can get to quickly. And that shows how bad my process is. As soon as I took that snapshot or took that Google image, I should have attached it to a record. Because then I keep everything. This is how I use Evidentia to help me organize information so that I don't have to do exactly what I have to do now, which is hunt and peck until I find where I stored those images. So, let me open it up for questions because I know I went real fast. I hope this was a topic of interest to you. As someone said last week or last episode, it shows you how a different person approaches a particular task in Evidentia. Someone else would have approached it totally different. But by tracing back until I hit that 1968 record where it had an address, then I could tie, okay, this particular parcel of property was the one with a house on it. So that was the first house that I ever lived in. We moved into it when I was a baby in June of 61. My sister had not yet been born, but I was over a year old. So I was, I guess, about 14 months old. And then when we sold it, that's when I discovered that we moved in November of 1966, which means I would have only been in school for 2 months. So they pulled me out of school, first grade, in 2 months. I have vague memories of that classroom. And then I moved into a new school, which was a traditional 4-room schoolhouse. I kid you not. That same November before Christmas of 1966. So that's helping me put some stories together. Looking over here real quick, I don't see any questions related to this episode. Family History Diva does ask, when I tried to upload my very first GEDCOM, I got an error. When I tried with a smaller GEDCOM, there was no error. And the error was error string too long. Family History Diva, I'm surprised by that because Evidentia is very flexible in terms of string lengths. The early versions were not. Oh, let me think for a second. Is that true? Yeah. The current version 3, there's got to be some field in that GEDCOM that is humongous. And there's just not enough space to pull in what that information is, which is actually a good thing to note because when I stored this as the information in the record, now I haven't done the proof yet, but if I had a proof, I could export it as a GEDCOM, and when I import that GEDCOM into another program, it may not be able to handle this much information in a note field. I'll have to see if there are any kind of limitations on that. Family History Diva, am I calling you wordy? I didn't say that. Okay, so here we've talked about one way to handle deed transfers, especially when that transfer takes place within the same family. It's less relevant probably to properties transferred in the 60s, but when you start looking at property that was transferred in the early 1900s or property that was transferred in the 1800s and start looking at those records, that's exactly what you're going to get, which is the property with the old oak tree on one corner that followed the stream that's not even there anymore for 140 feet until it got to the fence with a hole in the rock. Everybody at the time knew what that was, but by capturing the information in this way, you might be able to capture, okay, well, what about when it's broken up and transferred, 20 years later when that wall isn't still there and Uncle Bob doesn't live on the tract of land behind it, and the rock with the hole in it, got lost in a storm. You may want to keep this level of information in the claim. Remember, I normally wouldn't. If I had an address, I would have just said they bought the property at this address, they sold the property at that address, and this information would still be in the attached record, but I wouldn't put it in the claim. But hopefully this will help you, and I want to thank you for joining us for this episode of Evidentia Answers.